Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Quorum Podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas. Welcome back to the program. This is Ava Cole-Kelly. This week, we are with Leandra Lynn, who is a 68 Whiskey and a Divers Alert Network professional. Leandra, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a bit about yourself and what's keeping you busy.
So right now, a lot of different projects specifically for Divers Alert Network, or as we more commonly call it, DAN. We're working on trying to get a few things updated, try to roll out some new material that, we can't really discuss just yet. We're kind of in its infancy. But aside from that, it's just a lot of, a little bit of Army training here and there. That's actually coming up this weekend. And then hopefully some diving because the season's about to begin.
Nice. So you are a combat medic, a 68 Whiskey, and you've been that for over a decade now. Tell us about that. What got you into it? What made you decide to be a combat medic?
So it's a funny sequence of events. It actually wasn't a decision initially. I joined the Army originally as a linguist, but some things didn't align when I joined. And so I was given a few different options, and I chose, medic was one of three options that I picked. So after that, headed down to Fort Sam, and that was in about 2009, and kind of been bouncing around doing that ever since. Deployed in 2010 to Afghanistan, and then since then, I've worked a variety of different places, worked in a medical simulations training center, and now I'm currently a medical instructor for the RTI here for North Carolina National Guard.
So are you from North Carolina? Is that why you're there?
No, actually, I kind of came here on a whim. I'm originally from New York, but since I've turned 18, I haven't lived in New York since.
So is it the city or upstate New York?
I'm originally from Long Island.
And because you didn't have 3Gs in Long Island, I can tell that you haven't lived there for a while.
I I have actually never had the accent. Growing up, I was around a variety of different people. My mom's from Sao Paulo, Brazil. My dad's actually from New York, from Long Island. But all of my friends growing up were from all over the country. Their families were from a bunch of different locations. So I never had the Long Island accent.
Yeah.
But occasionally there'll be a miscellaneous W in words like coffee.
Fair enough. It's not quite as bad as like Boston, where they have a W in everything, coffee, and it's a little worse. So you are in North Carolina, and you are working for Divers Alert Network. So tell us about Dan. What is Dan, and why is it very important for the medic?
So Dan is a nonprofit um, dive training safety organization, or dive safety organization. Sorry, not training. We do have a training department. There's a few different departments here. Our medical department handles calls from around the world, both from members, non-members. We will answer the phone for anybody. And we answer specifically, dive safety questions, a lot of questions pertaining to, hey, I've been diagnosed with this condition, is diving something I can still consider? And then on the other side of things, we man a 24-hour emergency hotline. And that hotline is covered by three different call centers. So from 8:30 to 5, it's here in North Carolina. Then it transfers over to our partners in New Zealand. And then from there, after their 8-hour shift, it kicks over to South Africa, and then it comes back to us the following day. So we kind of chase the sun, and whichever call center is in the appropriate time frame, they'll handle the calls during that time period. For those calls, it's kind of an interesting mix. Um, some people here describe it as kind of like a poison control for dive injuries, where divers, their physicians, different individuals can call in and go, hey, I'm having these symptoms. These were the dives I did. What should I do? And then we direct them to either medical care or to, what the next appropriate step is.
So do you need to be a member of Dan to be able to call?
Nope. Anybody can call anywhere around the world. And we have a few different ways to communicate with us. So, there are both the phone lines. We have Ask a Medic forms online. But we can answer questions for anybody anywhere around the world. Granted, since there are other DANs around the world, like there is a DAN South Africa, there is a DAN Europe, sometimes other groups are going to be more suitable just because, dive standards are not the same universally. Um, but we will still answer the questions to the best of our ability. Just bear in mind that if you're in a different geographic region, it may not be 100% correct for that area.
And what kind of calls are you getting?
So for the non-emergency stuff, it's a lot of, hey, I was just diagnosed with this, can I still dive? Um, on the other side, it's I'm in X remote location, say for instance, Papua New Guinea or Cozumel's not remote, but it's a pretty common dive location. I have these symptoms. What should I do? And then it's a lot of times directing an individual to become somebody's patient, getting them under medical supervision. And then we can also assist the physicians there, you know, with just basic recommendations like, have you done a neuro exam? Because diving isn't something that most of them have a lot of experience with if they're not continuously practicing it. It's a short little blip in medical school, it's short little blip in paramedic courses. And if it's not a common practice, it's like anything else in medicine, it's a perishable skill.
So you mentioned that dive procedures are not the same around the world. Why isn't it? If we're all going off of the same evidence, why isn't dive procedures the same?
So when it comes to certain conditions, it's like anything in medicine. So for instance, an example I can think of is hyperbaric treatments. For the United States, there's a certain list of uses that they'll specifically use the hyperbaric chamber for. And in the different countries, say for instance, Brazil, they may have a few additional indications that they'll use it to treat. Um, I couldn't really tell you why, whether it's something related to insurance or if the data is coming from a different location. That's kind of outside of my wheelhouse. I'm not really sure why the standards are so different. But there are different organizations around the world who kind of govern some of those things as well. Like, for instance, here in the US, for hyperbarics, the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society um, has a pretty big say in kind of the decisions associated with hyperbarics here, whereas there's a different organization for Europe. For the South Pacific, there's the South Pacific Underwater Medical Society. So different organizations kind of govern some of the rules in different geographic regions.
Is there one major organization that's making these rules, or is there? Do you have a conference that everyone goes to every year to update their information?
So I'm not quite sure if there's like an overarching group. I know that for us, the guidance that we typically provide for the US, a lot of it comes from the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society, but I couldn't tell you if there's an overarching organization there.
So you have a call center there. What's a difficult call that you've had, or what would be a rough day at the office for taking these calls?
It it depends. Sometimes it's a rough one. It's a matter of, having having to organize resources. So say very remote locations, they're asking questions because there's a certain line we can't cross here, and that's telemedicine. We don't have a doctor patient relationship with these individuals. We don't know their full medical history. But when they're in very remote locations, it does become very difficult because, say, you're in a remote area in Papua New Guinea without direct access to a physician and medical care. Well, now these people are calling us to be their lifeline. So sometimes that becomes a bit difficult. I will say probably the most difficult though is fatality calls because now you have to not only be the person that that individual can talk to, maintain baseline, stay calm, which I mean any of us, every single medic on the floor has either been EMS, fire, military. So we're all pretty used to trying to maintain baseline and have good bedside manner and patient care, but also be able to in some cases console people, provide them closure, but also provide them the information they need to get their, you know, loved one back home, because that is something else that some of the insurance products that they have benefits them
So it's almost like psychological first aid is a requirement for the job.
to some degree. And I mean, there aren't a lot of fatality calls, but they are some of the hardest ones we have here.
So you don't give medical advice to these calls.
Yeah, so we can provide information, and that becomes a very very distinct line. So say for instance you called in, you said, you know, I have diabetes, can I dive? Well, the answer is we can't tell you that. We can't tell you whether or not you can dive. That's a decision between you and your physician. But what we can do is we can provide all of the information relative to diabetes and diving. You know, what the universal standard A1C is, like what the specific guidance for diving is, you know, things like avoiding overhead environments, avoiding strenuous activity, good safety precautions to take, such as, you know, testing your blood glucose at specific intervals. We can provide all of that information, but at the end of the day, we can't go, okay, you're a well managed diabetic, you can dive. That has to come from a physician that can actually evaluate them.
And would you suggest a dive physician or just a normal family doc?
So generally, we the goal is to send them to a dive medicine physician, but some areas that's not a feasible possibility. For people with uncomplicated medical histories, you know, somebody who's got no diagnosed conditions, nothing that would potentially be problematic with diving, it's not usually an issue if they see their primary care to get the sign off. But for people with more complicated medical histories, especially when there's like a lot of medications, or, you know, especially with complicated disorders where you could have a myriad of symptoms and everybody's going to present differently, for those individuals, probably going to a dive medicine physician is going to be a better idea.
So in your call center, how many calls are you getting in a day?
It depends on the season. During the winter, I will say, you know, there we very much like EMS or the ER. We don't use the Q word, but our our call volume is significantly lower in the winter, and the locations change. Um, During the summertime, we get a lot more calls close to home, just because, you know, summertime it's going to be warm here. But we maintain pretty steady calls year round, and it's kind of ramping up a little bit every year. Um, some days you'll get 8 per person. Mind you, there's five medics on our floor. Some days we've gotten up to about, I think the highest number of calls I got in a day was like 22.
So you're in North Carolina. What's the diving like? I'll be honest. I've never dove on the East Coast, only in the West Coast. But how is it there? Is it all murky? Do you have good viz? Is it choppy because it's the Outer Banks, or what's the diving like?
So unfortunately, I haven't gotten to do a lot of diving here. I got the job here at Dan, and then last year I shattered my ankle. So yeah, unfortunately, I haven't been able to get in the water here yet. This summer is going to be the first time. But from what I hear, the diving off the coast is absolutely beautiful. Um, Quite a few wrecks, which is kind of my favorite type of diving. So I'm excited for that. Aside from that, though, inland, because we are a little bit inland, we're located in Durham, North Carolina. There's a few different quarries. It's not really my type of diving. I'm more of a warm water, good viz, you know, but I'm excited to see what it's like off the coast this year.
Nice. I have to say, in Malta, where our nonprofit's based, has some spectacular diving. Not quite as good as Roatan or some that I've seen in other places, but it's yeah. There's a lot of World War II wrecks, and Viz is usually pretty good.
Well, I'll have to make my way out there at some point. I was spoiled because I became a instructor in Hawaii, so I'm used to, you know, hundreds of feet of visibility, warm water, you know, year-long summer. So,
Wow. I learned to dive in Seattle, where if you can see your hand in front of your face, you're doing quite well. and yeah, the dry suit with 35 pounds of weight. Yeah, it was a challenge, but it's good wrecks up there as well.
Well, the good part about that, because I learned to dive in New York where it was cold, but my visibility was still pretty good. But when you learn to dive in cold conditions, poor visibility, then you're prepared for the worst case scenario. So I always tell people, if you're going to learn to dive, learn somewhere where it's, this isn't probably the best term to describe it, but learn somewhere gross. Go somewhere where you can't see your hand in front of your face. Learn how to dive where there's current, thermoclines, because then when you get the nice dives, the nice warm water, good visibility, you are more than capable. But when you also get those terrible conditions, you're prepared.
I guess it would be difficult to have the other way around, where you are in really warm areas with not even a shirt and getting used to that and the buoyancy issues, and then you get to a cold environment with a dry suit. That was a steep learning curve.
Yeah, and you don't have the same amount of supervision. When you're learning how to dive, you have an instructor or there with you. You potentially have an assistant instructor, potentially a dive master. You have several professionals around you who can help. But then once you get on your own, that's it, you're on your own. So everything that you have to learn after that, there isn't somebody going, hey, this might be a better idea. It's finding out because you made a mistake.
Yeah, teaching diving. I wasn't an instructor. I was a dive master. So my job was to hover above the line of people, and you're just counting bubbles. Really, you get to you can't see them. You just see five or six different streams of bubbles, and as soon as one of the bubbles stop, you're like, oh crap! I got to go and chase this person to find out where they went. It was fun, but it was a challenge.
Yeah, I joke around that, teaching people to dive is like herding cats underwater. Um, it's incredibly fun when you have a good class, and everybody's, paying attention. But when you have one of the more challenging classes, especially when they're big classes, you're just playing a game of trying to keep everybody safe, and it involves bouncing from one person who's trying to bolt to the surface to the next person who's having an issue with their gear, back to the middle to try to teach another skill. But when they're, done and everybody's excited and everybody knows how to dive and they can do it safely, that's super rewarding.
Yeah, it is indeed. And when you see the person is just learning how to do this, and they get to that point where their buoyancy is perfect, where they're a foot off the ground and not touching the ground and just hovering. Yeah, that's quite pleasant. Dan has membership programs. So and I'll be honest, I never blow bubbles without having a current Dan membership. So tell us about what that is and why the benefit is of having a membership with Dive Alert Network.
Okay, so just for some clarity, I was actually a Dan member well before I ever worked here. I think I got membership originally in 2014 when I was, becoming a dive instructor, or no, 2015. 2015. But it has quite a few different benefits, and by no means am I an insurance agent, so you know this is just kind of my understanding of a lot of the programs. But as far as membership, in order to purchase insurance from Dan and go through the same underwriters, you have to have membership first, at least for dive accident insurance. And the cool part about the membership is that has its own benefits. So we have publications that we write, Alert Diver. It's published online, as well as, with certain membership levels, you'll actually get sent a physical magazine, and that has different material written by, um, some professional divers, our medical team, multiple people around the company, our safety services department. And so it's a culmination of a bunch of different people within the organization all writing this publication. Um, it sometimes provides cool locations to travel to, provides information about potential dive injuries. It has beautiful photography, so you can kind of get an idea of, different dive travel. But the other parts that come along with that are things like, evacuation benefits. So nobody thinks about it when they go to travel, but, say for instance, you have a medical emergency, and some of the best places to dive are some of the worst locations for medical care. So you go there, have a medical issue, and that hospital is, essentially a mud hut. What do? You have to figure out a way to get yourself back to the appropriate medical care. Well, that is a part of the membership benefits, is essentially that medical evacuation piece where I've gone to this medical facility and say, for instance, it was a cardiac issue that required a cath lab and the hospital didn't have it. Well, then what happens is they call us, and as long as the physician that they've been evaluated by at that location states, hey, they're going to need this and makes that recommendation, says they can't support it there, then they get on the line with us and we coordinate that piece of transferring them from one medical facility to another to one that can provide the care they need. And that's just a membership benefit. That's not even specific to dive accident insurance. There's certain travel assistance benefits, things like assistance changing flights due to a medical injury or, lost luggage, lost dive gear. And then on the insurance side of things, if they purchase dive accident insurance, what a lot of people don't realize is your traditional medical insurance may not cover hyperbaric treatment. So in a lot of locations, that's tens of thousands of dollars, which is why, having that insurance product is super important if you go somewhere and make a mistake. Because number one, if you get in the water, there's the potential for DCS, period. The only way to 100% rule out the risk of DCS is to never dive. But if you get in the water and you make a mistake, and it happens all the time, it happens with, your novice diver who's, on their 20th dive. It happens with dive pros who have been doing this for the last 25 years. We all make mistakes, or sometimes something happens. It's not even a mistake that you've made, and you end up with decompression sickness. Now, if you don't have the money to foot tens of thousands of dollars in some locations, there's a few locations around the world where if you can't pay a hospital bill, they won't let you leave. So it's really scary, especially if you're not aware of that and you're in a remote destination. Well, how do I get out of here? They won't let me go anywhere, and I don't have the money to pay this up front. The other is some locations they won't treat until you pay. So now you're essentially not able to get the care that you need. So that's why those products are super important, because if your insurance isn't going to cover it, it's a very expensive thing to find out, especially when you're in distress.
So Dan would pay for the dive chamber problem. Can you comment on how often Dan is having to pay for dive chambers for the people who get the Dan coverage?
So I unfortunately don't know those numbers, so I really can't. But I will tell you that we get a few of them a week. So, and I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, something I'm not privy to, nor have I ever looked up, just because at my level, I'm more responsible for handling the calls and less responsible for tracking kind of data like that. But
Well, several times each week is several times too often, and it's more reason to make sure that you have the Dan coverage.
absolutely.
So, for the listener who doesn't know much about diving medicine, can you go through some of the diving emergencies and diving injuries?
So the most common call we get here is usually going to be associated with barotrauma, specifically the ears. Um, when people can't equalize or equalize too forcefully, we get a lot of middle ear barotrauma. It's the one that you commonly hear referred to as, a block or a squeeze. Um, and then on the ascent, a reverse block or reverse squeeze. It's probably our most common call, usually a fairly benign injury. Sometimes it can be more severe. You can end up with, an inner ear barotrauma as well. But barotraumas are just all, your pressure injuries. You can get them in any airspace. So your ears, your sinuses, lungs. Very weird one would be, kind of a gastrointestinal issue. And sometimes what that comes down to is if something's blocking an airspace from equalizing. The other is kind of the DCI umbrella. So those are your decompression sicknesses. depending on the location, that could present a variety of different ways. There's a pretty extensive list of symptoms, and you generally won't experience all of them because it all has to do with where the bubbles propagate. And then on the other side of that, arterial gas embolism. So sometimes we'll see that as a consequence of barotrauma. Sometimes it'll be associated with, some kind of shunting mechanism where bubbles, because everybody following a dive has venous gas emboli. If bubbles get over to the arterial side, you can end up with an arterial gas embolism. Um, a lot of hazardous marine life injuries, you know, bumping into coral, people hunting for lionfish and accidentally getting a little closer than they intended.
Yeah, the man of war, the long strands of stingers that you can dive through that looks like long string. I had one of those wrapped around my second stage. That wasn't fun.
Yeah, I can't imagine. That would not be a good time. I've been stung on 3/4 of my body by jellyfish, but never come in contact with a man of war.
So you also have a dive medical technician. So there's a DAN DMT. Can you tell us about that and how it's different than the IMCA DMT?
So I'm not incredibly familiar with the program, so unfortunately I really can't speak on that. That's actually probably the next thing that I'm gonna try to go through if possible.
So I've looked to it here in Europe, and Dan Europe has their own way of doing things, but we are definitely interested in looking at the DMT option at our college. But at the moment, yeah, we're still not able to kind of get through all the red tape to get that.
Yeah, with Divers Alert Network, so there's uh, Dan America's, Dan Worlds, and we kind of work both of those. Dan Europe is actually a separate group, so although we work together, they have different insurance products, different programs. They service a different region. So unfortunately, I can't really speak on behalf of any of their programs.
So wait a minute, I always register with Dan when I'm diving in Malta. Does that mean I'm not covered if I register with you and not Dan Europe?
I'm going to say this ahead of time. I'm a medical professional. I'm in no way an insurance agent. So I really can't speak on behalf of benefits and coverage specifically. But generally, you register based off of where your home of record is.
So, as a medic, where can the medic get the best up to date information about diving medicine?
So there's a few different resources that we use. In general, I will say that they're the sometimes the best outlet is actually going to be us just sending a message because we share any information that we have as widely as possible because that's our purpose here is dive safety. The Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society for here in the US has a plethora of information, or it's EUBS in Europe, I believe. But we pull from a variety of different sources. Um, I generally just recommend that somebody shoot us a message because we can provide all of the resources we have available as well as your own research. But definitely recommend staying off message boards, not just Googling things. Um, Dr. Google has a lot of interesting information, not all of it's correct. So that sometimes poses a few problems, especially with message boards. I will say that when it comes to medical information, asking the local dive instructor is not a good idea unless they're actually a medical professional. A lot of people have opinions about dive related injuries, but they're not always based in fact.
Yeah, fair enough. So, yeah, having a dive professional to get the advice from, not a dive instructor that did a 1 day EFR course. That's good advice. So, if someone needs to get in touch with Dan, how do they do that?
So for Dan America's, Dan Worlds, we have a 24-hour emergency hotline. Um, with some of the other organizations, they also have a hotline. Some of them do have the ability to communicate via WhatsApp and online as well. We have an email, but prefer that it not be, any kind of emergencies, just because it's not as frequently monitored. But the emergency hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 365 days a year. So even if you call on Christmas Day, somebody will answer the phone.
And it's all on dan.org.
And our emergency hotline's a North Carolina number, and it's fairly easy to remember because it's 919, which is our area code here, 684-9111.
So, Leandra, my final question for you is this. What advice do you have for the new medic, new nurse, new doctor who is just starting out on their career and learning about dive medicine?
Honestly, the best advice that I can give is to use your resources. So a lot of individuals want to be the one who can answer the question, but are less apt to reach out to other professionals and ask those questions because you want to know everything and you want to be able to answer things on the spot, and that's not always going to be the best service. Being able to reach out to different organizations, ask the questions you need to, and then make an informed decision is always going to be better.
That's good advice. Well, Leandra, thank you for taking time to talk with us today.
Not a problem. Thank you so much for having me.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine. If you would like to earn CPD credits for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credit, free access to our virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on our college website at quorum.edu.mt.